In this week's EV news, several of the world's biggest car makers lobbied the UK government to weaken or delay the ZEV mandate. VinFast announced they're going to build a $2 billion EV plant in India. UK EV sales have flatlined in 2023, according to SMMT, and the UK has missed its motorway ultra-rapid charging target, according to the RAC. Welcome to the first EV news of 2024, and it's all a bit doom and gloom really, well, apart from maybe that story about VinFast. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe with notifications turned on so that you don't miss out on the next one. For everyone, make sure you click that like button so you tell the algorithm that these videos are worth watching. Remember, if you've seen a story that you'd like to see featured on future EV news videos, submit the details at dothisnext.co.uk so that I can pick that up and consider it when I'm making these videos going forward. Let's get into it though. Let's get into this week's EV news. First up, several of the world's biggest car makers lobbied the UK government to weaken or delay the zero emissions vehicle mandate, according to The Guardian. Toyota, Jaguar Land Rover and Nissan were among the companies that asked for delays in enforcement of the zero emissions vehicle mandate. That is the rules that mean they need to sell increasing proportions of electric cars or face heavy penalties. I think if you'd asked me to name car makers that would appear in a story like this, I'd probably name Toyota, but Nissan being on there is a huge shock. The company that brought us the Leaf, for crying out loud. Volkswagen, Ford and Tesla actually argued that the mandate should be tougher. I think that's quite obvious for Tesla, right? Electric cars is what they do, but VW and Ford came as a little bit of a surprise. The lobbying was contained in responses to a government consultation that was shared with The Guardian by Tom Riley, the author of The Fast Charge, an industry newsletter. As a reminder, just so you fully understand what it is, the Zero Emissions Vehicle or ZEV mandate is not just the sort of 2030 or 2035 new internal combustion ban. That's not just what we're talking about here. These rules actually mean that car makers will be penalised if EV sales don't make up a certain amount of their sales in the years leading up to 2035. That needs to be 22% of their sales in 2024, rising steadily to 80% by 2030 and of course 100% by 2035. Now, I think it's fairly obvious why Toyota were keen to have this weakened or delayed. They're hugely invested in hybrids, and they've gone to extraordinary measures in the past to downplay the roles that EVs have in a net zero future. They could, of course, sell hydrogen cars. They count as zero emissions too for these purposes, but there isn't really enough places to fill them up. Jaguar Land Rover are similarly behind the curve on this. Despite bringing us the I-Pace a few years ago, they've done very little since. Although order books for the fully electric Range Rover are now open. So they'll maybe get there eventually, I guess. And JLR argued that the targets in the early years are set at unachievable levels. Well, they would be unachievable if you haven't actually bothered to get on with EV development, wouldn't they? Tesla said the rules were not sufficient to drive more than organic market evolution and said that it is possible that targets that look a stretch today will quickly be surpassed. Though it's hardly surprising that that's the line from Tesla, who only sell electric cars, don't particularly struggle to sell them, and will also likely, I think, end up trading credits with other manufacturers who are struggling to meet their targets. All in all, I can't say I'm actually terribly surprised by this story, apart from, of course, Nissan's involvement. They had so much market advantage over the early years of the Leaf, and they just completely pissed it all away, rather than continuing to innovate. It is quite interesting though, as Tom Riley is actually quoted as saying in the Guardian piece, clearly a lot of car makers, despite being outwardly enthusiastic about the EV transition and everything they'll publish, and apart from Toyota, will make it look like they're fully on board and really supportive. They clearly have reservations about the trajectory that the ZEV mandate insists that they take. Now let me know what you think in the comments on this one. Are you surprised that car makers were trying to weaken these rules, or is it just big business doing what big business does? I'll be interested to see what your thoughts are. Next up, Vietnamese car maker VinFast have agreed to build an EV plant in southern India's Tamil Nadu state, in an investment worth up to $2 billion, marking its foray into the world's third largest car market. Now, we do like a VinFast story on this channel. I'm not convinced yet that they aren't actually just a massive parody brand and that they're not going to achieve anything, but I am going to continue to follow their journey closely because it is very interesting. This is far from the first time we've talked about VinFast on this channel. If you're a regular watcher of EV news, you'll know all about that. VinFast said it intended to commit $500 million to the first phase of the project and would begin building the plant later this year. Tamil Nadu is India's biggest exporter of electronics and is a hub for its automotive industry. So it seems like if you're going to build a car plant in India, especially an electric car plant, that's not a bad place to do it. They definitely do talk a good game, do VinFast, but these big ambitions remain to be seen. One thing's for sure, good or bad, I'll be keeping an eye on them. Now it's used bargain of the week time, the feature where I show you a used electric car that has caught my eye on AutoTrader, usually because it looks like a bit of a bargain. This week's used bargain isn't even used, and it's not a car either. This is a massive deal on a brand spanking new motorbike. We're very car focused on this channel usually, but this deal was so big I definitely had to talk about it. The Seat Mole, interestingly named electric motorbike from a manufacturer that doesn't normally sell motorbikes, is an equivalent of a 125 petrol scooter. So 125cc. It is available for a massively discounted £2,495 for a brand new bike. That's less than half of the list price. Now, I don't think many people were buying these at the list price, which might explain the discount. Nearly £6,000 for an electric 125 equivalent with an 87-mile range doesn't really seem particularly viable, especially when you can go and buy a brand new petrol from Honda, like a PCX 125 or something like that, for less than £4,000. But at £2,500, massively undercutting that, it actually seems like a pretty good deal. Now, as I said, Seat don't really make motorbikes. What this actually is a rebranded motorbike. So this is made by Silence. And you might have heard of Silence because they're going to be launching an AMI rival, which it comes in both L6 and L7 form, a bit like the Twizy. So you're going to be able to get one without the 28 mile an hour speed limit if you want. And one of the big things they do is they have removable battery packs. And the Seat Mo or Silence S01 that it's basically is with a Seat badge on is no different. So where this comes into its own really is you can take the battery out of this bike and it's like a trolley case on wheels, right? So it comes out of the bike and you can wheel it. So if you live in a flat or whatever, you wheel it. All right, I'm guessing it might be reasonably heavy. It's like a 5.5 kilowatt hour battery. I'm not sure what the weight is, but it comes with wheels, so you can wheel it around. So I guess if you had a lift in your building, you can wheel it into the lift, take it up. It might be a bit difficult if you've got to carry it upstairs. I'm not sure. I'll look up the weight and we'll put the weight on the screen here. But the idea being you can charge it in places where you don't necessarily need to take the bike. So you can just take the battery, you can plug it in. Sounds really convenient. The reason this really caught my eye, and I posted about this on Twitter. If you don't follow me on Twitter, you probably should. Because this is where I tend to talk about like used bargains and stuff and go way beyond just this little feature here. I keep a close eye on the market and tend to talk about it there. Where I think this really has appeal is not everybody that has a 125 or equivalent is like a hardcore nailed on biker. So all the problems you potentially have with electric motorbikes, which really just boil down to the fact that it doesn't make a nice noise, kind of go away. Because if you're just using it to commute or to do food delivery or whatever, you're probably not that bothered. And actually, the fact it's a bit quieter might actually be a good thing. Maybe not from a safety point of view. I know a lot of bikers like to be heard because it means you're more likely to be seen if you're heard. So there is that. But I thought this really was quite appealing for someone that just wants to get around and get around cheaply. I'm actually really tempted myself. I don't have a motorbike license. and I would need to at least go and do a CBT to be able to ride it. So I'm probably not going to be buying one of these anytime soon, but I was really, really tempted. But let me know what you think in the comments. Does an electric 125 equivalent with an 87-mile range for £2,500, brand spanking new, with a removable interchangeable battery appeal to you? Because it certainly does to me. Next up, the SMMT sales figures for 2023 are out, and it's not great news. If you watch this channel regularly, you'll know that the SMMT are a motor industry body that track new car registrations, and they publish monthly and then annual figures that show you how many cars of a certain type have been registered in the UK over that period of time. And that's something we tend to keep an eye on because it gives an idea of like EV market share, stuff like that. Although more EVs were sold in 2023 than in the year before, with just under 315,000 registrations, that's an increase of 50,000 over 2022, the market share has stagnated. It has actually fallen, believe it or not. 16.5% of cars sold in the UK in 2023 were battery electric, full electric, not hybrid, anything like that. And that's actually down from a 16.6% market share in 2022. Plug-in hybrids took 7.4% of market share. That's up from 6.3% in 2022, with just over 141,000 registrations. Now, this fall in battery electric market share has actually prompted SMMT to call for a reduction in VAT for electric cars, saying if we cut the rate in half to just 10%, it would represent an average saving of around £4,000 per purchase, which they say is more likely to incentivise people to buy an electric car. Now, in theory, that sounds good, but I actually don't agree with that in the slightest. I don't think we need to be pumping public money into electric cars. We had the grant scheme previously, and every time they cut the grant scheme, manufacturers just happened to adjust list prices so that it had minimal effect on their sales. So the price would just come down a little bit because the grant wasn't available anymore. And I think exactly the same thing would happen with this. I think if we saw a VAT cut, list prices would just creep up just that little bit, and manufacturers would be the real beneficiary of a VAT cut. Furthermore, one of the things we talk about a lot is that not enough private buyers buy new EVs, but I find it's not very feasible that you're going to just cut VAT for them. So you're going to cut VAT across the board, and that means actually it's the fleets that are going to benefit the most from this. The lease companies and stuff that are buying lots and lots of cars, they're the ones that are going to save the most. And well, to be honest, I don't really get it. I think that there are many more things we could do to promote EV adoption that don't involve giving people a discount on a brand new car. What I do think would be good is to put some kind of support into the used market. In Scotland, for example, you can get an interest-free loan over 5 years if you want to buy a second-hand electric car. And I think doing something like that in England and Wales would be brilliant. There are an awful lot of really cheap used EVs available out there, as you know, as we talk about every week on this channel. But one barrier to that is that at the moment, car finance for used cars is quite expensive. So unless there's some kind of manufacturer support behind them, it is actually quite difficult to justify used over new if you're talking about sort of nearly new, because the interest rate on the finance could stand in the way of that. Obviously, with that ever-increasing base rate and finance becoming more expensive, that is a bit of an issue. So if government wanted to actually provide some kind of support, then cheap or interest-free finance for used car purchases to allow people to buy and own a car, I think would actually be much more beneficial than further support for new registrations. Salary sacrifice, reduced company car tax, and all those things already incentivise companies to buy new cars, and I think stimulating the used market, which would push used prices up a little bit if there's more incentive to buy used, would mean that then there is also more incentive to buy new for the fleets because residual values are higher, total cost of ownership is lower. That has to be the way to go. Cutting VAT on new cars isn't going to help with that at all. And in fact, that might actually further damage the used market when you sort of reduce the gap a little bit between new and used. Well, actually, there's less incentive to buy used, and that means we see further declines in used values. So I don't think that cutting VAT for new cars is going to have the desired effect. And I mean, I don't think it'll happen anyway, not under this government. But it'll be interesting to see what you think. Do you think cutting VAT on new electric cars is the way forward? I certainly don't. And finally, in more doom and gloom, the UK has failed to hit its target for the rollout of rapid chargers at motorway service stations. Government previously announced that it wanted all motorway service areas to have at least 6 rapid or ultra-rapid chargers by the end of 2023. And of course, given it did very little to actually enable that, we are nowhere near. REC have published a report using data from ZapMap, which shows that only 46 of 119 sites meet this criteria, a long way from that government target. The problem is, though, it's all well and good saying you have a target, but I haven't actually seen much in the way of government actually providing support in order to make this happen. Yes, there's the Rapid Charging Fund that could provide financial support, though very little of this has actually been claimed by the operators to date. It's pretty well established that it's grid capacity and the speed of connections to the grid that's holding up an awful lot of this expansion. You would think that government could be applying more pressure to the DNOs and to National Grid to make that happen faster if they were truly serious about meeting this so-called target. The best the Department for Transport could manage in response to this report by RAC was saying that charging facilities are available at 96% of motorway service stations. Now that's a cheeky little statistic, isn't it, if you think about it, because, well, what they probably mean is, yeah, most motorway service areas, apart from the handful that don't have any chargers, have a couple of those crappy upgraded legacy Ecotricity Rapids, right? So the ones GridServe installed to replace the old DBT ones that didn't work, which, yeah, they'll give you 50 kilowatts-ish on a good day and actually are pretty useless. Everybody knows they're pretty useless. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I completely avoid any motorway service area that only has like those 2 or 3 old units, because not only are they slow, they're really, really busy. They're really, really oversubscribed. And so I go somewhere else. I go somewhere where there's more units. So it's all well and good saying that 96% of motorway services have chargers, but actually the usefulness of it is very, very low. And it's only the sites that have actually been upgraded to have 6 or 12 or more chargers that are actually of any use to anybody. And so if that's the best the Department for Transport can manage, I think it shows really well that it's all well and good moaning about not meeting targets, but you need to actually do something to help the operators actually get towards those targets. And that's what's missing. But that's it for this week's EV news. Hopefully it'll get a little bit more optimistic as time goes on. Let me know what you think about any of these stories in the comments, and don't forget, if you've got any interesting news articles that you want to see covered in future videos, submit the details at dothisnext.co.uk. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.